All right, everyone. I think we'll get started just because there's a Barbary class coming for those humans that need to prepare to pass the bar, unlike GPT-4, which we know doesn't. Thank you, Avi. I'm honored that you guys would come there to talk further with me about this stuff. I thought, just in the background real quick, let's run some actual co-counsel doc review stuff and kind of see it in action a little bit. And then let's just talk and it'll run in the background. So what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to use something called review documents, and I'm going to upload a bunch of Obama's speeches. There he is, and I'm going to send these. And what I'd like you guys to do is give me questions that you might ask. I'm only doing 20 speeches, so it can't be too, unique, but something like, does Obama make a joke in this speech? That was one I alluded to next. Other questions you might want to ask, like, does he mention the weather? Does he talk about family? Is he mean? Get creative. You can get mean, but just understand it has to be reflected in 20 speeches. So if you're too...
What is Obama's biggest concern for the United States?
So this one works on a speech-by-speech basis. So I'm going to say, what is the biggest concern in the speech? Because, depending on the speech, he probably brings up, but that's a great one. Others?
What is the overall sentiment of the speech based on topic?
Oh, you want sentiment analysis?
We'll do
love
that.
it. What is the overall tone? I think the people I feel the saddest for are the people who spent the last 30 years doing sentiment analysis. Really trying to get these old AIs to know happy versus sad. And here comes GPT-4. Wait until you see how that thing handles it. Any other questions before I hit go? All right. Get my answers. All right, so that'll take a minute. Oh.
Could you ask the system to describe hand gestures or facial features while speaking?
Okay, so this is important. So what OpenAI did not release yet publicly is the visual GPT. That you can hold up a picture of a little kid crying on his tricycle and say, what happened here? And it says, that looks like a little kid fell off his bike and got hurt. That's not public yet, and I don't know what I could say or not say about it, but it's not public yet. But there are, patent figures. There's a lot of places where image recognition could be quite useful, and K6 would definitely want to be bringing those.
Hand gestures wouldn't come.
Oh well, depending on what you're doing, like a deponent, right? Micro expressions and all sorts of signs of deviousness or things like that. Okay, so we'll just let this run. It's got OCR things, and it takes a while. I guess I think the topic is literally like questions, discussion. So you heard from me all this morning, so let me shut up and ask you guys, and not just questions, if you guys have thoughts or like things that you're sort of, convictions that you're increasingly strong about, I think maybe the best use of this time would be for us all to discuss.
Yeah, there's an elevator.
What are your thoughts on this theory that's coming out recently about auto collapse due to AI training AI?
So the problem is of everything this thing is so voracious for data, right? It's so hungry for data. At some point, you kind of run out of data that you can get, even if you're willing to kind of play fast and loose with copyright. And so then the question is, can AI itself produce output that then you can spit into another AI? It's by all accounts a real concern. I'll be honest, I don't fully understand yet. I need to dive into why does everything collapse then, as opposed to maybe kind of plateau. You just hit a certain where you're not gaining anything. Personally, I would take all of Pacer and feed it through a large language model if I could. But you know me, and I'm a little bit of a zealot. All right, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, does the collapse potentially come from sort of like hallucination repeating, right? It's creating false data, and then you're feeding it false data, which creates more false data, which sort of then actually neutralizes all data, like what's real.
Right, so misinformation is amplified. But that's true right now when you feed in the whole internet, right? My God, right? So that's there, but it's just not that, unique to it. Other questions or thoughts? Please.
So in my talk, I talked about breaking the training ladder. And you had alluded to this a little bit in your opening session, that if law firms shift to more and more technology, they're not going to provide that simple work for young lawyers clients aren't gonna pay for young lawyers, and so the firms are gonna downsize. How do we get experienced lawyers if we've gotten rid of the training steps for lawyers to become experienced lawyers? Are you guys talking about that? Is there, to me, this is an existential threat, and I'm curious what you're thinking.
These days, there's like 5 different existential threats you have to try and that's definitely one. So I'll say this, it's definitely come up and we've talked about it. What I haven't gotten to a place yet is like somebody saying like, well, let's do this instead, right? You can, I mean, theorize and be like, well, what if you took the associate out for lunch and spent 2 hours teaching him about whatever it is you thought that he was going to glean there, right? Wouldn't that work, right? But, so yeah, I guess the short answer is I don't think I haven't thought of and I haven't heard anyone at firms yet in these early days think about like what is the alternate system. I think in part because what is it going to mean to be a lawyer is now a little bit of a moving target in a way that it hasn't really been for decades, right? I mean, if you go with Anthony Cromman's account, we have moved, right? And it has not been good. But if you don't know what a lawyer's going to be, it's a little bit hard to think about how are we going to do it. But so yeah, so that's when and if people have thoughts on like what might that look like, right? You can even have simulated tasks where it's like, you know, the client's not paying for it, but you're going to go through this. I know Jody Armstrong at Columbia, she makes her students do paper shepherds, like walk down to the library and do it.
Ooh.
Right, I know.
She's mad at them?
I mean, she says, I love Jody Armstrong, she's so cool. You know, she also said, I wanted to get rid of all the cites, you know, because they interrupt the flow of the text, right? Imagine if the book said, you know, it was the best of times, 1372, F sub 2 to 4 5, it was the worst of times. Who reads like that? But she was like, no, it's like jazz. It's got this like rhythm to it. And I was like, all right, Jody. Jody's on a different level. Like, I love it. All right. So yeah, so to be determined, one of the many things we have to talk about, and if I do hear anybody with solutions on this, I'll circulate.
Pablo? Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry. I was
sorry.
going to expand on that if you.
Well, that's what I was gonna, I said, one idea I have is just that I've heard people talking about how they're using ChatGPT to teach, like in the inverse, right? They're giving their students an essay written by AI and then saying like, tell me what's wrong with it. So to that end, lawyers are still gonna have to review things that are AI created. So that's a learning mechanism, I think, potentially for your associates, right? Is like, maybe you're producing this AI work, but someone still has to review it, and that's definitely a learning mechanism.
Right. But I know I'm firmly on record about editing output from an AI is very different than blank page to content.
100%.
Now, for some things, the legal standard section for summary judgment, like you know that by heart by your second. I mean, there's some of this is less, you know, open to that. I remember we were litigating against Cravath, and they used the word lard as a verb at us. They said, defendant lards their brief with something, something, something. And I was like, oh, that's so good. Like, what a great word choice. It's so, like, cutting, you know? It's such a great... And I was like, I just don't think the AI is going to get to those heights of that sort of just like... I mean, you got to be creative to be that insulting and eloquent. I mean, that's an eloquent way to do it, right? And the reason I remember it is that I was affected. So I don't know, my part of it, I romanticize writing, I'm sure my grandfather's one of my, you know, but a lot of folks, I just worry so much that if we lose it, and including in its flowery, elitist, whatever sense you want to use for it, I don't want to lose that. So.
I was going to say, to his question about the training ladder, I asked that same question not over 9 years ago at a Stanford Codex, because I had been a large law firm associate, and I'm Craig from the LAI, by the way. I'd been a large law firm associate at sort of the height of the giant doc reviews, and I had worked on a case where my job was literally to go to Miami Lakes, Florida, and be on a catwalk and watch hundreds of contract lawyers reviewing documents. And that's how I learned to be a lawyer. When he said that today, I was like, yeah, I turned to my team, I said, yeah, that was me. That is how I learned to be a lawyer. So I asked that question of a panel of Silicon Valley law firm partners that were there to extol the virtues of what was then stuff like equivalence and other predictive coding tools that weren't this, but raised that same question. And the answer I got, which was wholly unsatisfying, was we agree that that's important, but we think maybe like 100 hours and not like 1,000 hours. So, you know, we think there's still room where you can do that. So again, 9 years ago, the industry hasn't collapsed in the 9 years, and B, like, for what it's worth, that was the answer from the people that were supposed to be worried about it then.
on?
Camera off?
On.
Wait, like, I don't control the camera here, do I?
Like
Oh,
on
the
the
Zoom.
Ah.
Yeah, it is off, because we started with the stuff off. We can turn it on if we need to.
No, well, I just
It was,
did.
it was a request.
Oh, is it?
But I don't know.
Did you get it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go like the other way though, right? So who here started public interest, right? And you had clients and they needed something, needed now. And often good enough was enough considering the systems they were working in. And is that, even if like, we're not gonna have the eloquent writing and the people who are learning, will we finally have, and I guess some of the programs I haven't attended yet have addressed this somewhat. Is something like this finally gonna be available to Legal Services Corporation to help all those clients and get through things quickly? And how will we know if we actually achieve the justice gap considering the prices of these, which you have quoted? So.
Right. And by the way, the whole reference to the LARD thing, I realize I'm caricaturing myself to some extent, but I also believe it, right? And I appreciate that while he's here like wondering about how great the LARD word is, 100 people are in line at a clinic and can't get, some basic form filled out, right? So I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. Capitalism is not an unmitigated blessing, but every once in a while it'll put its shoulder to something and you can see remarkable progress. And one of the things right now where capitalism is firmly putting its shoulder is creating the chips that you need to run these AI, to make them less expensive to run and to make them more efficient to run. There are open source models that are being developed. I don't think they're going to be as good as what comes out of the private sector, but some of them might be good enough to kind of reach, it might be behind and sort of things like that. So I do think the cost will come down a lot. In the interim, we're working with Ford Motor Company, and one of the things we're talking to some of their nonprofit folks that do things like, if you're middle class or upper middle class, whatever, you commit some small transgression, and daddy hires a lawyer, and you get it expunged, and everything's like nothing happened, right? But if you don't have those resources, well, now you go wait in line outside of the clinic and hope that they can get to you that day, right? Well, if this AI could make that go much faster, so that everybody gets expunged, regardless of whether or not their parents can hire a lawyer, I think everyone would agree we're a little bit closer to what our ideals are.
Then we wind up into the people who are promoting it, like the traffic guy.
Who's Mr. Traffic Guy?
You know what I'm talking about.
Fix my ticket or whatever it's called.
You're not paying.
Do not pay.
Ticket.
Okay.
Do not pay.
Oh, Josh Browder.
Josh Brown.
Should we talk about Josh? So I think I met Josh. I was like, this is the Jimi Hendrix of legal tech, because he was 19 years old, and he came over from England. I met him in Stanford, and he had just built a system to help people get out of parking tickets. And there's been some debate about did he inflate a little bit, how many or whatever, right? The stuff he's doing in consumer rights, I think, is fantastic. I will concede whenever he gets into law, it gets a little bit ridiculous, right? He was going to have somebody wear an earpiece to court in the API. I mean, I was like, I would pay to have that transcript just for what a train wreck it would be. I'm sorry, at some point, some disasters you just want to watch. And they wouldn't let him do it. But I would say this on Josh, I would not, I think Josh is very much, his heart is in the right place. I think he's, and he's also a little bit of a master sometimes of media manipulation, right? And so sometimes, let's face it, things that are a little bit close to stunts have their intended effect. And then he's like, okay, I won't have AI litigate in front of the Supreme Court. But now a lot of people have heard about his company. So, please.
So what is preventing you from sort of doing like an Aaron Schwartz with Pacer and downloading as much of Pacer as you can into the system? Because I think one thing that's really exciting for me is thinking about what judges could do with this system and how they could actually aggregate facts, and they're not just sort of working with their small body of case law, but they're working with the universe of.
But my first reaction is, what is preventing me from doing the thing that the guy who ended up killing himself because of all the lawsuits and aggression that happened at him did? Cowardice, clearly, right?
Yeah.
Pacer's $3 a document if you do it well, and I'm well past the days where I can go hack into anything. So right now it's just the paywall.
So it's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, it's prohibitively expensive. By far, and that's a whole other disgraceful thing that we can talk about separately. But it's I would love to feed this thing through into an LLM. I think it would be stronger for our purposes.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on AI detection. Do you think we're going to have reliable systems to tell you, hey, this text was written by AI, this text was written by a human?
So the problem is that the newer model can outsmart the detectors for the older models. That's part of it. There's some work that they say might be able to kind of do it well. I think it's going to be like a lot of things in security, just this like ever-evolving battle, right, where they figure out certain tricks and things like that. What's funny now is you'll see people will turn things in as papers, and then on page 17, it's like, as an AI, I'm not really allowed to do that.
That will detect, right?
Yeah. So the people who get away with it will be so smart and hardworking, you almost want them to give them the AI. A little devotion.
I've got kind of a follow-on question, maybe for the whole group, which is, does anybody feel like their institutions are maybe sending mixed messages to students about, because on one hand, there's a lot of, this is just a tool. It's a tool like any other tool. Then that whole train of thought. But on the other hand, I've heard the president of my university say, well, use of a tool like this is covered under our plagiarism and our code of conduct. I'm like, well, that doesn't really jibe with it's just a tool. It's a tool, but if you use it, you're in trouble. Is anybody else wrestling with that or trying to harmonize all those different potential messages and what's actually getting down to the students about it's neither good nor bad, it's just a
You're slicing the wrong way, right? A tool matters how you use it, right? And
right.
hacks, certainly can be used for good or evil. And so if they're letting you use it, they're saying use it the way you're meant to use it, and don't go around, hurting anybody with it.
Yeah.
But to enforce that, it's impossible. And as he's saying, with a static document, no chance, right? If you were able to interact with it, you might be able to tell. But if it's already printed out, the whole point of it is to make it so you can't tell. So, but yeah, you're gonna have to leave it up to people's judgment, I think.
So we've been struggling with this at the existential level and the very practical level. Right? At the very practical level, the code of conduct says that if you are turning in a final exam assignment, right? So now we're defining it to that document, it has to be entirely your own work. If Turnitin flags it, you go through the honor code process, now you have to defend that Turnitin was wrong. I don't care whether it came from by a thesis or AI, it still didn't come from you because it exists in the Turnitin database 2,700 other times. And so it's not about AI, it's about the rules of that drafting exercise. In my seminar, every source needs to be cited. So properly cited, there's no difference between something that, right, certainly using AI to find the original documents and go back to the original documents, read those documents and sign them, it's a great use of the tool. So it's all, again, it's about training the students to use the tool the appropriate way and understanding what our policies mean. But that also means faculty understanding what our policy means and not simply throwing out the label plagiarism without knowing how it actually operates.
You're not saying that Turnitin's going to catch an AI-written document.
I'm saying it claims that it catches a lot of them.
No.
But I'm using it in my class, and it does report that there are a certain percentage, it says what percentage match it is for AI, what paragraphs were proposed supposedly by AI.
But so one of the things that when we're trying to answer the same question at my university, people are like, can you tell? What can you tell? And the best one I saw was originality.ai, which did a fairly good job at that time. Can't tell you what it's going to do right now, of saying, yes, this came from ChatGPT. But I kept throwing things that I wrote into it, and it kept telling me I was a robot. So along with, and I found very mixed results from pretty much everything. We couldn't test Turnitin, but we tested a lot of others, and we're just not getting anything that was consistent enough that I would be comfortable telling the faculty, yeah, this is how you can feel good that this is AI or not AI.
So you could start demanding version histories.
Yep.
And just, if I don't see that very sloppy, ugly, terrible, painful process of blank page to this, like you know that when you see it, and you certainly know when it's just, bloop, oh, look at that, the spirit struck you, huh, and you just wrote it perfectly out. So there might be things like that.
Even in my seminar this summer, right, they're turning in 10 pages next week, they're turning in a first draft, right, first full draft, second full draft. So if they want to suddenly blossom into brilliant writers, the final week, they've got a lot of explaining to do.
And another way to, and again, you guys know much more than this, but if you got up there and said, listen guys, here's the good news for those of you who frankly don't deserve to be lawyers. you can now kind of cheat and get to a C. You can do that. You can hit a button and you'll get a C. For those of you who want to excel, unfortunately now your road's a lot harder because it just became automatic to come a C. We automated the gentleman's C. There you go. And then the sort of inherited in them, the sense of like, I have to now go bring something beyond what an AI would predict to write. It's kind of mean, I mean, it's heavy to have them do that, right? Because now are they going to come up with wild theories just because they want to, distinguish themselves? But maybe that's kind of what we need to start fostering more, is like what isn't predictable? What isn't just your vanilla, the AI would spit this out? And I'm getting some looks from you guys that are like, no, they need to know what the elements of a tort are, and they're not supposed to invent a new one just so that they can be different. So it's a balance, right? But I do think that as grades start to come out, what does a grading curve look like when this stuff is out there? Whether you can let people use it as an assistant, if you don't police it and it's a replacement, right? That might also drive. Please.
And I think your statement to our students of now it's going to be easier to be mediocre and harder to be outstanding is the same challenge for us as educators as well. And so the question of are we sending mixed messages about the use of this as a tool, but don't you dare use it? We've been doing that for decades. We have told students lawyers need to be collaborative and cooperative, and you need to be able to work together, but don't you dare ask your colleague for an idea or have a conversation with them. And so, I mean, we have to stop. This is an opportunity for us to stop and say, what is it we want them to learn? Do we want them to learn how to generate pages and pages of text automatically? Well, then we'll teach them how to use these tools. Do we want them to learn how to be creative, collaborative, compassionate? Then maybe we need to change the courses we're teaching and the way we assess their learning.
We not teach it the same way we've been doing for the last time.
I know, it's a radical thought, isn't it?
Because that's the same conversation. It's like, how are we going to do finals if this is someone could just walk in and like, what if?
You didn't
rethought.
It's also, I mean, don't you, my sense is even within schools today, there's like this spectrum of how much focus there is on the practicality of like practicing law versus sort of the deeper, what should the law be, right? I went to Stanford, it was a fantastic school, a lot of policy kind of stuff, and I remember my friends would call me with criminal questions. And I'd be like, oh man, do I have no idea like how to help you at all? I can tell you this, if somebody's driving to commit a sexual assault and they see a billboard of a woman who looks like their sister and they don't do it, it matters whether or not it's, I'm grossed out because that's my sister, it's kind of weird, I'll do it tomorrow, versus like, wow, my sister's a woman, why would I hurt women when my own sister's one? And they're like, I'm sorry, Pablo, what? Like, how does that? It's like aggressive jaywalking. I was like, I don't really have much for you. and I said, like, I had Larry Lessig for con law. We spent the whole class talking about the Eldred v. Ashcroft copyright case and sort of how do questions go from background to foreground, right? I'm not sure I can tell you what every constitutional amendment does, although I've got one right here. So I guess my point is, even within our current system, I feel like there are schools that have like saw themselves as like, well, don't trouble yourself necessarily with the day-to-day as much as like, what should the law be? What are the policy reasons? Go get the U Chicago Law Review article with the socionomics that shows the dissents thing. And in a way, I feel like if this stuff can automate a lot of the groundwork, we can all kind of maybe, I think that might be what being a lawyer is a lot more of. And I think that's a lot of what people have in mind when they go to law school. That's kind of what they want to do. And then just the harsh reality comes in when they find out that it's, rims of ducks. That's not Tom Wares, what's up, man? I didn't know you were here. Good to see you. All right, please.
They want to make money.
They want to make money, yes.
Oh, sorry. Well, so it depends on where you're at. So, like, I went from one school to another, and I'd be like, when I was teaching them at Chicago Kent, like, all right, you're all here trying to get them an idea of, like, teaching them how to do billing, like how to, like, calculate their time. All right, why are you in law school? And everyone's, to make money. Great. That means you have to keep track of your time. And that's, I think, part of the reality of, like, you've got this idea of, is the law school here to learn a trade, or are you here to learn a profession? And that's that big question that underlies what we're saying, a lot of what we're saying too. And we've got students with very different goals, sometimes combined.
All right, and I'm going to ask, so, they use the phrase Brave New World from the Huxley novel a lot, people throw that around a lot. And because I was really interested in bioethics, as I alluded to, and I remember talking to Hank Greeley, and I used Brave New World, and he said, Pablo, do you know what the next line of that play is? Of course I do. 'Tis new to thee. And it was like a mic drop, as in like, you think this is also new, but we've seen this a lot. Tom, I want to ask you, take that challenge on of, we're like, oh, there's so much new stuff, this is such unprecedented, da-da-da-da, and now you adopt 'tis new to thee, as in, you know, how much of this do you see as actually raising fundamentally new issues, or just taking things we've always been struggling with, access to justice, over-reliance on tools, right? Do you see anything here that's like fundamentally novel, or is this just?
I do. I actually took a course in the sort of history of socio-technology at one point, and the main thrust of that was that each new technological development has created more jobs than it destroyed. I don't think that's going to be the case with AI. And I think that's what's fundamentally new about it.
Keep going. I mean, is it because of the speed of which ever had to tell him to keep going before?
I know. Hi, Craig. I just think that it's going to replace a lot of jobs that will never be recaptured. I mean, you've got something that is fundamentally operating on a human level that can be equally skilled at some tasks. You know, I won't pretend, in my position as an old retired guy, I won't pretend to have thought this all the way through, but that's what strikes me immediately about it.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be a very different world if it does that. In Silicon Valley, it's all about universal basic income, right? We just give everyone $2,000 and some soma. You guys get the Brave New World reference and send them off to the Feelies or whatever the movies are called in that dystopian novel. Okay, no, thank you. I'd be curious to see like spits. I mean, for some of it, like I point out like citator flags, those red flags. So Susan Neville Mark showed that they don't agree with each other a lot. It's subjective, right? And I actually did an experiment when we went to law school. Everyone read the same thing and voted on what flag to give, right? And Paul Callister's work showing that lawyers would just see the flag and not read the case, right? So you've got all the pieces there. You've outsourced your analysis to some black box system that you don't understand, and you're lazily not kind of digging into it, right? To me, a lot of the things we talk about with AI, you could actually find even in something as pedestrian as a citator flag, right? But certainly in sort of those sociological aspects, socioeconomic impacts, yeah, it could be quite different.
So the question I would have that sort of goes with that is, you know, what standard do you have to hit to have replaced something? And that may not be crystal clear, but I have an example that I use all the time, which was in 7th grade. I forgot to read Oliver Twist, and then I found out on the bus that morning we were having a test on it. So somebody said, hey, you better look at these cliff notes. And so I flipped through them for 15 minutes on the bus, and I got the highest grade in the class. So that set me up for a life of like hitting 80%. If I did it enough times and collected my 80%, my Pareto optimal, knowledge level on an array of fields, if I added up enough of those, I was unique, and it was pretty cool. So instead of striving for mastery, I strove for well above average, and I collected a lot more things, and it worked out really nicely. So the question is, maybe that works for lawyers too?
The problem is when you hit things in life that don't have cliff notes, which is...
Well, we just created a generic cliff note creator for everything, did we not?
No, I don't think
Isn't it?
No.
Really?
No. Somebody asked me this after my talk. She said, Thurgood Marshall, as a lawyer, set up 5 different litigations in 5 places as like 4-dimensional chess over a decade to plan just how to surface certain conflicts. And then Positive was like, can the AI do that? Well, let's get it to do that. And I was like, no, I really can't.
You just used the chess example this morning.
No. I'm talking, there's chess, the simple board game, and then there's like the navigating the political and judicial branch over a decade.
If we're going up a vertical learning curve, how long is that true?
Right, well that's true. It's always true. At some point, it could be omnipotent or something like that.
But actually, I don't know that even factually, right? So if you had said, right, we want the Supreme Court to change this rule, right? Broad versus Brown of Ed trained Dobbs, right? It said, okay, this is how we bring a series of a half dozen pieces of litigation to iteratively move forward. So if I went to ChatGPT-4 and said, right, give me 5 models that give me the right facts to bring to the court over the next 6 years, it would generate a number of answers, if not the correct ones, certainly enough to allow me to create a good model on the Second Amendment, on name the doctrine you want to change.
So you're saying ask the AI to help you brainstorm sympathetic fact patterns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it can take the additional benefit of reading every case that each one of these justices has done to know which claims to promote, right, as it does it.
Yeah, you see, we can't rule out it can't always, because now we're in intelligence. So like, right, I don't think the current systems would fare very well doing that. But I haven't tried it yet, and it has surprised me. Tom?
Actually, I have one more thought on the de-skilling issue. As you probably all know, right now the screenwriters are out on strike.
I'm married to one.
Because
she's not happy with
that's
me.
right,
Yeah.
you are. I heard you say that this morning. You know, and they're worried about the influence of AI on the generation of movie scripts, television scripts, that kind of thing. And you know, I sort of have two views of that. One is that if you're a screenwriter who is doing something like everything everywhere all at once, you probably have nothing to worry about. If what you're writing is Hallmark Christmas movies, you really have something to worry about because they're completely formulaic.
And the problem is a lot of them use the Hallmark movie to then have time to go do this, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I saw Lawrence Fishburne, the great actor, I saw him portray Thurgood Marshall. And one of the lines he says as the judge is, a lawyer who is not a social engineer is a social parasite. What a great quote. And so at the Q&A, I asked him, do you think it's true of actors, right? That same thing. And he goes, well, you know, maybe, but I got to make kung fu movies to get my kids to go. Talk about The Matrix. I mean, The Matrix is a pretty good movie. So, I mean, I think to your point, a lot of the writing and the work it is, because that's what Liz says, Pablo, you have this like romanticize everyone's like Gore Vidal or like the tortured artist, da-da-da. Most of it is just workaday folks just trying to, you know, make a living kind of doing this. And so, you know, taking that away would be pretty substantial.
I knew none of you will be old enough to remember this, but I knew the actor who did all of those get off the can and get on the stick commercials for Gillette deodorant or whatever. And I just looked at him and I said, what? And he looked at me and said, 5 kids, 4 years of college.
So you commented earlier that, you know, that ChatGPT-4, the language model that they use is famously opaque, and most of the sort of commercial ones are.
Yeah, but can I just stop you for one more on this? Yeah. Like, the precise contours of it. Right, but we basically know that they put most of the internet through their Google Ads and stuff like that.
And my question is, do you think that pick your favorite metaphor, the genie's out of the bottle, the ship has sailed, whatever, do you think that we will never get back the question of, is that copyright, is it allowed under fair use, or do you think that there's a circumstance under which they will have to change something to either excise content or act differently based on what they've ingested?
I can see both paths. So Mark Lemley, his recent article on it kind of went from like, it's clearly fair use to like, oh, you know what? It's kind of a gray area, right? Because, not necessarily even because of how they're using it, but because it can output verbatim stuff, right? And so at that point, right, I think it could come up, right? And it's hard for me because on one level I'm like, what could be more transformative than this? I mean, come on, they're using it for this weird guessing game. I do think there's some part of us maybe that feels like you just took our collective work as a species and threw it into this machine
and even if
that
you
now
recognize,
beats us at chess.
Even if you recognize, you know, well, maybe it is transformative, we're going to go with that, we're going to extend whether it's, you know, the Google books or, you know, there's different cases like that. Well, who owns the output then? Right. And what are the meats and contours of that? Because if no one owns the output, well, it doesn't almost matter that it's not copyrightable, because I can't then do something except looking at what my additional expression is to what's in it.
Right. But I mean, and again, we're in various levels over my pay grade, but I mean, photography, right? You'd say, oh, look, the camera, when the camera first came out, it was over. Art was over. No one's ever needed. And how can you own anything that you take a picture of? The camera did it. And in the same way, at least right now, there's a lot of prompt engineering behind the scenes to actually, whatever this thing does, right? And so there is iteration and creativity there. I think you should, I think if you write an amazing prompt, it should go to you, I think, frankly, in that system. But these are all, like how this stuff can help, what underpins the practice of law is one whole ocean. And then how should law apply on this stuff, right, as we know, it's another big ocean. I think, I don't know if you guys are familiar with what's happening with Reddit. Mm-hmm. So they're charging now hundreds of thousands of dollars for what used to be free. Speaking of Aaron Schwartz, right, this work. And part of it is, look, we don't want these companies to just take all of our stuff and make models with it, right? That's not fair. And so they're charging, and so you're seeing these sort of secondary effects of this, right? Where people are suddenly putting up paywalls to protect content from being used. Should we dabble in a couple of these?
Yeah.
All right. So the debate so these are different speeches here. So let's see, let's find a one. Okay, let's see. So this was a speech at Yangon University. He did not make a joke that I caught in this one. But you'll see here, it doesn't just kind of tag it with like a one word. It describes it, right? It actually literally describes what its thinking is. And then, as I mentioned, we always show the sources, right? So you always see what it says. So that's very different than doc review that we're used to, where at most you tag it responsive or not, right? It's not, you don't get these little notes, these little essays. Here's an example of the joke. Right, so lighthearted things and things like that. Doesn't say what his, and that's sort of, he doesn't explicitly say this, but here's what it is. That's, again, very different for computers, right? And then here's the tone. He's optimistic a lot. God, I miss him, huh? Can you imagine doing this with the last guy? Okay, so. Let's see. Oh yeah, I can throw that here. So this one's humor. So correspondence dinner, tone, humorous, lighthearted, right? To be expected, and I would hope. Let's see how well it does, because I mean, he made jokes nonstop here. Jay Leno's ratings, healthcare bill. I think here, obviously, it's missing a bunch, I think, the recall. So this is another sort of thing. Like, notice I said, does he make a joke, not list every joke in his speech? And this is where this model can be kind of interesting. It's kind of literal, right? So if you say discuss versus reference versus mention, it pays attention, frankly, in ways that humans, you're kind of used to humans filling in a little bit of that. And like, so that's just something to note about it as well. So yeah, so there you go. So, I mean, this is just one of many examples, but this kind of review, probably, let's say we just gave this assignment to 3 first-year associates. They're not back in right now. And so this is just kind of this thing where for all the trepidation we have and for all of the potential dangers and the atrophy and all of our writing and all these things, how do you not do this? Like, how do you literally tell the client you have to wait 2 months to see the most relevant evidence in this case before you decide to settle it? It seems like it's a form of malpractice to not use it.
But how do we know that the system didn't miss something that might be like a form of very subtle humor, or might be a form of like a personal joke?
Well, how would you know it if the 3 associates came in?
Well, I have to read all of the documents. Yeah. So you just have to trust that it's.
Well, so you touched on something important, because my whole little trust but verify dance, which is great. For recall, it's a little hard because the verification might include reviewing it. So
I'm thinking back to like the doc review example. I used to do a doc review in an insurance broker's case. So we had to read, a large sampling of documents in order to understand the language that they were using, and then come up with a list of terms that indicated that there was some like funny business going on. And those were that was the language we were looking for, but we didn't have that language until we read a sample of the documents.
Right. And you didn't know it at the time, and it's not your fault. You were missing stuff left and right. All the literature.
Oh, I'm sure.
All the lawyers were, right? The one study on this showed that 2 major findings. Lawyers miss a lot of things, and they're blissfully unaware that they're missing lots of things. They assign themselves as, I did great, So, I mean, this is, and there is one side of this, which is like, okay, Pablo, so if we have to go check all this, is it adding value, right? Like, if I have to go redo it all. And I guess, I think that what we're seeing, I think in time you'll start to see its accuracy is enough, at a place where just like with associates, maybe you spot check certain aspects of it. Part of what we do too is we're working on it being able to say I'm not sure, like this seems weird, this is speculative. So it'll err on the side of bringing stuff in, even though it might not be relevant, but we'd rather you dismiss something that's irrelevant than miss something that's relevant.
Just channel Obama and say the best is the enemy of the good here, right? You're getting a great result. Why would you, how much more effort do you want to put in to get the best result?
I don't know, when it comes to responsive documents, you kind of want the best.
You kind of do, but if the only way to get a better result than this is to read through it all yourself anyway, then are you going to get a better result that way?
Well, so with citator flags, what I wanted was an Expedia system that would say, here are the 5 major platforms, and what red flag, yellow flag, you can envision a world where you have multiple models, right? There's nothing like hybrid vigor in this world. We had 2 different models trained on different systems as a form of catching it. But again, it's exorbitant to use one right now, so it's going to be a while before I think it's cost efficient to use.
How long before we can upload student papers and get it to do a content analysis for us? And grade.
I'm not even kidding. You could, in fact, I'll tell you guys, not to automate grading, but we have this one skill that's called contract policy compliance. And what this is so a Fortune 50 company came to us and said, this is how we do things. Here, let me just show you an output because I think we're short on time. Let me see if I can pull this up. The company said, look, we have our way. I went the opposite of the direction I want to go. Okay. We have our way of doing things at this company, and we have to deal with all these wacky vendors, and their contracts are all over the place. If we fed you the rules, the way we do things, basically our grading rubric in as many words, could it police these incoming drafts and tell us what's wrong? And the answer is yes, right? So here, let's take a second to load. Let's say the company's like, we always explicitly include force majeure in the, earthquakes in force majeure. So the computer here has cut, it says, yep, here's the clause in the draft. Here's how it runs afoul of how you do things. And then it will actually even propose a red line to be like, here's how I would fix it. So you can imagine saying, just for starters, if you don't mention this or this defense, right? If you don't see that this is clearly this exemption, police that. You could, in theory, go through them all and immediately have a pile of people who did not mention it or see it or reference it and people who did. But, you tell me how far that gets you.
I already do that with Word.
Yeah, so you just use
I have all my exams in electronic files. I do searches for keywords, and it's an easy way to check to see.
Right. Easier if you get a report.
It'd be easier if I got a report, yeah. But
and easier because if you say like they must mention the defendant's fear of something, there's a lot of different ways you might say that, right? And so that's just traditional keyword prison versus LLMs.
What are the law firms you're working with or talking to about this stuff saying about how it's going to change their business model?
Depends. Everything from it won't because we get hired for stuff that's unautomatable to we're not going to hire as many associates, and we're going to start strategically shifting how we bill. It's been floated things like just don't charge for junior associates anymore, but then the partner quadruples their rate. All the plans seem to somehow keep them as millionaires.
Well, I think my question,
the thing of human nature that part they lock in, and then we'll work on the rest.
Really, to what extent are you thinking about the billable hour and how value isn't tied to how long it took, right?
Yeah. There's one guy asked me, I remember, this is just one of many, many weird moments I've had in the last 9 months where I'm like, God, things just feel so different, right? They asked me, Pablo, can I ask you an ethical question? And I was like, well, that doesn't normally come up on these demos about that. You normally just say, thanks for your demo, get out of my, if something, let's say something used to take 50 hours and I charged the client $75,000, but now it takes 45 minutes. Can I still charge them 45 minutes? Like, well, I don't think it's for me to tell you how to interact with your clients and stuff like that, but I think some part of me thinks that sounds off, to be honest.
Well, that's the death of the billable hour. It's task-based billing at that point, right?
Yeah, could be that. Which apparently there's a lot more arranged fee stuff happening, but yeah, this could be it. And will we miss?
You just don't tell them that.
Will we miss the billable hour? Will we miss entering our time in 6-minute increments? And thinking of it all as that, I don't think we would, frankly.
Well, again, that goes back to capitalism, where if your firm won't, some other firm will.
Right. And the clients are going to dictate a lot of this, right? If they won't pay for X, right? I think a gentleman here.
That's what. Yeah, so I was in-house counsel for a number of years, and so a lot of the conversation is describing something I didn't experience in my practice. So I'm curious, as a follow-up question, say, what are you hearing from the client side, the large client side on this? Because the example and the joke that you made that they wouldn't bill for the first year associate, but they would quadruple what they billed, that's just fraud. You know, it's not a joke. So I'm
It's not fraud if you make
troubled
them,
by
if they
some
agree
of
to
the-
it.
We're looking at this because we're not looking at it from the view of the client and the benefits to the client. So what are you hearing from that side?
So, the clients that we worked with, and Casetext primarily has been selling to law firms, so it's only recently then that this has expanded us. We look over our bills and we see some clear areas where this could save a lot of money. To be honest though, legal spend is not, I'm starting to learn about life in these Fortune 200 companies, and legal spend is a trifling amount of money to these people, to this system. Where they start to get excited is things like, so we had one, so it's like regulatory stuff, right? All of these incoming customers, somethings are coming in, some of this means you have to go talk to the EPA about it or something like that, right? As an assistant for that process, AI can help, right? Because you got these millions of all these messy kind of discussions, right? But then it's not just do you tell an agency, it's do you turn off the factory so you don't make more widgets that have whatever the problem is. And once you're in that world, he's like, you're not in law anymore, you're in business now, Pablo. And I was like, oh, and like suddenly more zeros are flying around, etc. So interestingly, I think that although I think there's huge gains to be had for outside counsel spend, I don't think that's what's exciting. I mean, I've seen it, it's not what's the most exciting. I think they're really interested.
That's the least exciting. I think it's the day-to-day work. I just think that the examples I'm seeing don't relate to what my real life experience was.
So with the the policy compliance one where you can immediately...
To me, that was a great example because there's a lot of variations in that. I can see how AI can help in this, but even that force majeure, if I'm negotiating an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, that language is not going to be negotiated.
Oh, sure. That was just a very pedestrian example.
The example is sort of trivial to me, but...
Okay, but that's because I chose a trivial example. You could, swap in if there's a carve out for blah, blah, blah based on stock. You can apply it to much more sophisticated terms and have, in fact. And I didn't go through all the transactional use cases, but what they seem to also be drawn to is the AI can review earlier mergers in similar contexts and propose like what's market and say sort of like this is within the range of what's normal for this.
Market stuff is really valuable, but I think that the issue on the compliance and some of this stuff, and I think it makes more sense in the litigation area, but our data we're looking at it backwards, it's historical, and we're in environments where things are changing rapidly. In my case, in a 6-month period, we went from sort of hosted software licenses to totally cloud agreements. Okay, so the data we had in there before had some utility to us, but would not be a be-all and end-all. And then also because when you have lots of negotiated agreements in that data, you run the same problem you do with associates. They grab the last one, and it favored the other side.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem inherent in precedent. Like, there's only so much precedent you can do. And that's true for lawyers, and litigators, I mean, as well. All right, guys, I think they're going to kick us out of here. Thank you so much. And I mean, as I'm sure is kind of clear, we're just beginning right now to